You're listening to the Curtis Earth Show here on WPRK, Winter Park, Florida. I want to thank Jenny Cherapalpal and Simon Time for spending their precious time with us and giving us the Simon Time Machine and all that fun stuff. So we'll see them again next Thursday. We have Chris Crespo at the bottom of the hour. He'll be talking about the new films he's seen, hopefuls coming out that perhaps would be worthy of checking out. But right now, ladies and gentlemen, we have Scott Novak. Fossil Fuel Divestment at Rollins is his lecture, and we appreciate having you on the show. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, I'll let you do your thing, and then we'll talk a little bit afterwards.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good. So my lecture is called The Case for Fossil Fuel Divestment, Global Citizenship and Environmental Stewardship in the Age of Greed. In the United States, the question of whether humans contribute to climate change remains a matter of heated debate among our politicians. So for a moment, let us pretend that humans do not contribute to climate change at all. More specifically, let us pretend that the burning of fossil fuels has no global warming impact upon our planet. Unfortunately, if this imaginary scenario really were the case, then our reliance on fossil fuels would still have tremendous negative consequences. It is beyond debate, for instance, that the burning of fossil fuels releases pollutants, and if humans are exposed to these pollutants in great quantities, then this can dramatically shorten their lifespans. As Naomi Klein notes in her newest book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate, running an economy on energy sources that releases poisons as an unavoidable part of their extraction and refining has always required sacrifice zones. Whole subsets of humanity categorized as less than fully human, which made their poisoning in the name of progress somehow acceptable. Ecuador is a good example of a sacrifice zone. In this country, Texaco dumped more than 18 billion gallons of toxic waste from their oil operations into indigenous water supplies, poisoning over 30,000 indigenous people. Texaco operated in Ecuador from 1964 to 1992, and was later purchased by Chevron in 2001. The pollution in the country remains to this day, and Chevron refuses to pay for the full cost of the damages. However, one does not have to leave the United States to find sacrifice zones. Coal mining efforts have destroyed the landscapes of West Virginia, and fracking has poisoned the water supplies of communities in the South. In addition to the loss of human lives, all these fossil fuel extraction efforts result in a loss of natural habitats and biodiversity. Therefore, given all of these negative consequences of fossil fuels, our current energy system, even without the threat of global climate change, is horribly unsustainable. When you throw climate change back into the equation, a phenomenon that even ExxonMobil has admitted exists, our reliance on fossil fuels becomes an existential crisis. The present conflict in Syria illustrates what this crisis looks like on a microcosmic scale. Between 2006 and 2009, Syria experienced one of its worst droughts on the record. A 2015 study from the National Academy of Sciences concluded that rising global temperatures may have contributed to the severity of this drought, which caused an estimated 1.5 million farmers to abandon their livelihoods and move to cities in search of work. Unfortunately, the government infrastructure could not support this influx of people. This was a factor that led to the protests that have resulted in violent conflict in the state, which continues to this day. Hence, the Syrian crisis foreshadows future climate change-related crises. It also demonstrates the terrible fact that the people who are least responsible for climate change are destined to suffer the most from its effects. But there is good news. We can stop this climate crisis from worsening. Countries such as Denmark and Germany and states such as Hawaii already have plans to cut off their reliance on fossil fuels by 2050. A future of 100% clean energy is possible. Unfortunately, what's standing in the way is a lack of political will. As one can infer from the hundreds of public officials that deny climate change, the fossil fuel lobby is a powerful one. That's why the global fossil fuel divestment movement, which aims to delegitimize the fossil fuel industry, and in doing so, lead the way to a sustainable future, is so essential. Nearly every country in this world, including the United States and China, has committed to keeping the average rise in global temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius. If warming passes this limit, climate scientists predict that the world will face severe droughts like the one in Syria, rising sea levels that will force millions of people out of their homes, and mass extinctions. In order to keep warming below this 2 degrees Celsius limit, the International Energy Agency calculates that the fossil fuel industry will need to leave approximately 80% of their reserves of coal, oil, and gas in the ground. Given that fossil fuel companies have spent billions of dollars acquiring these reserves, they have absolutely no intention of doing that. In short, the fossil fuel industry resists the transition to sustainable energy because they want to make money. Free market capitalists call this the incentive of profit, but this is a euphemism. In this case, quote-unquote profit represents greed of incalculable magnitude, a greed that is willing to sacrifice humanity's future in pursuit of short-term gains. The mission statement of Rollins College rejects this selfish, short-sighted way of operating. Besides the obvious calls to sustainability in our mission with terms such as social responsibility and environmental stewardship, an equally significant term is global citizenship. Part of what being a global citizen entails is that one should care about what happens in places such as Ecuador or Syria as if it had happened to our own community. How would we feel, for example, if Texaco dumped over 18 billion gallons of toxic waste in Lake Virginia? What if a drought worsened by climate change caused farm workers to riot in Winter Park? Just because these things aren't happening here doesn't mean that they are not happening. Surely, we cannot be so morally complacent about where our investments go if we are to act as true global citizens. In light of all these facts and inspired by the mission of this college, I decided at the beginning of this past semester to found the Rollins Coalition for Sustainable Investment, a student organization calling on the Rollins Board of Trustees to divest the Rollins endowment from fossil fuel companies. According to Assistant Vice President of Finance Bill Short, Rollins has about 1.2% of its $350+ million endowment invested in fossil fuel companies, based on what the college can currently identify. This number amounts to around $4 million. Of this number, we are asking that at least 1% either be invested in a socially responsible fund or go to fund sustainability initiatives here at Rollins. This number amounts to roughly $40,000, quite a small ask compared to the overall size of the endowment. Even though divestment from fossil fuels is a relatively new movement, 41 colleges have committed to divestment so far. These 41 colleges are just a few of the 441 institutions that have divested. Collectively, these institutions have $2.6 trillion in assets. Each institution that commits to divestment helps to publicly delegitimize the fossil fuel industry, just as the college divestment movement in the 1980s helped to delegitimize and ultimately end apartheid in South Africa. If Rollins chose to divest from fossil fuel companies, it would be the first college in the state of Florida to do so. This is a tremendous opportunity to demonstrate our leadership as a liberal arts college on what is the most pressing issue of our time. Fortunately, there are strong economic and moral cases that demonstrate why divestment would be good both for the college and for the planet. Here's the economic case. While fossil fuel companies may have been profitable investments in the past, they have become increasingly volatile. In light of the challenge of climate change, this volatility is expected to only increase in the future. A report published by The Guardian earlier this year reflects this state of affairs. According to the report, over the past 5 years, investors who divested from fossil fuels earned an average return of 1.2% more than investors that didn't. Clearly, this data contradicts the popular belief that divestment hurts financial performance. There's good reason to believe that this trend will continue. As previously mentioned, to prevent global temperatures rising past 2 degrees Celsius, roughly 80% of fossil fuel reserves must be kept in the ground. The global value of these reserves is around $20 trillion, money that will have to be written off when governments finally decide to crack down on fossil fuel companies and shift to sustainable energy systems. The Rollins 2015 Executive Summary of Endowment Investment shows that Rollins has actually lost money by investing in fossil fuel-heavy funds. The Vanguard Energy Admiral Fund, which invests primarily in oil, coal, and gas companies, has provided Rollins with a negative 2.8% return since the college started investing in the fund. Additionally, the RS Global Natural Resource Fund, which also invests heavily in fossil fuel companies, has given Rollins a whopping negative 9.9% return since the college started investing in it. This demonstrates that fossil fuel companies are not the risk-free assets that some people portray them to be. The Parnassus Fund, on the other hand, is an example of one of the many socially responsible funds that enjoy good returns. This fund, which does not invest in fossil fuel companies, has outperformed the S&P for its 1-year, 3-year, 5-year, and 10-year returns. For example, the Parnassus Fund's 10-year return was 9.98%, while the S&P 500 indexes was only 6.79%. Investors and colleges ignore this information at their own fiduciary peril. As for the moral case, it's pretty straightforward. Our reliance on fossil fuels has always required sacrifice zones and contributes to climate change, a phenomenon that is already affecting some of the world's most vulnerable populations. We have the power to change this dismal state of affairs. Therefore, every institution at every level must do its part to promote clean, sustainable energy solutions. For Rollins and every other college that invests millions of dollars in financial markets each year, this means ensuring that their portfolios align with this duty. Of course, not everyone agrees with this line of thinking. During my meetings with the Student Government Association, which has passed the resolution endorsing the Rollins divestment campaign, one student vehemently opposed divestment based upon the idea that, as he said, investments are not moral decisions. Perhaps the student and other people like him confuse an absence of the feeling of moral duty they have while investing with an actual absence of moral duty itself. Clearly, how to invest millions of dollars impacts the world and is thus a moral decision. Therefore, if one does not think that investments are a matter of morality, this points to an inner moral failing rather than to an outer non-existence of moral duties. In the United States, this moral failing is certainly understandable, if not excusable. The overarching pressures of capitalistic individualism and efficiency have created a society where many view the deity of profit as the ultimate measure of value. However, even within the context of these cultural pressures, Rollins has supported divestment before. In the 1980s, Rollins was one of the many colleges that chose to divest their endowments from certain companies operating in South Africa as a way to call for the end of apartheid. This sets an important precedent. Rollins has already recognized that basic morality and common decency should indeed play a role in our investment decisions. Hopefully, the board will remember this precedent when dealing with the moral issues of the present. In the meetings our divestment campaign has had with various groups on campus concerning fossil fuel divestment, some have suggested that the best way for Rollins to battle climate change is to support environmental education and make clean energy investments on campus, such as installing solar panels, rather than divesting from fossil fuels. But this presumed choice between supporting environmental initiatives on campus versus divestment is a false dichotomy. In order to mitigate the threat of climate change, it's clear that Rollins should be pursuing both of these actions. If the board chooses not to divest from fossil fuel companies in any way, then they should at least choose to change the mission statement of this institution. I'm afraid that the phrases global citizenship, responsible leadership, social responsibility, and environmental stewardship would all have to be cut. In its place, the board should insert a phrase such as making a profit by any and all means necessary, or better yet, the following sentence. We at Rollins value short-term profits over the lives of our current and future graduates and employees. This may sound extreme, but make no mistake. Continued investment in fossil fuel companies presents an extreme threat to all of our futures. I don't think that the college will have to change its mission, though, because I believe in the Rollins that values global citizenship, responsible leadership, and environmental stewardship. I have seen this Rollins champion many initiatives that are in line with these values in the past, and do not expect that, after some necessary dialogue, this time will be any different. However, if this time is different, our coalition of 400-plus supporters will be prepared to mobilize in order to ensure that every level of the Rollins community is in true alignment with the college mission. We students, as well as our future children and grandchildren, deserve a future not defined by climate chaos.
Very good.
Yeah, that was great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well researched, concise, and passionate.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I love the activism
Yeah.
of today's college students. It's really cool.
Thank you very much.
But you said it best. I mean, the research shows that these stocks are not making money. So why continue in the face of, I mean, if the goal is to enlarge the endowment, then you would want to divest from these stocks that are so volatile.
Exactly. In the short term, some of them are still making profits, but as we've seen from Rollins' losses, they're riskier and riskier. And based on what we know about climate change, those risks are only going to increase in the future. Now, I should add that I actually have an exciting update about this campaign. I got it last night, actually. I met with the Victor Zolo, the finance chairman of the board of trustees, and Jeff Eisenbarth. He's the vice president of finance and business at Rollins. And after that meeting on Monday, the investment committee met on Tuesday, and they've agreed to reallocate $400,000 to, it's called the MSCI ACWI Low Carbon Target ETF Fund. It's a long name, but basically
very snappy.
It's a more environmental fund. It has less fossil fuel exposures than some of the other funds that we've been invested in the past. However, that money, that $400,000 was not a divestment. It did not come from the fossil fuel funds that we're already invested in. It's just an additional, more sustainable investment. So we're happy. This is a definite step forward, but there's more work to be done, of course. They're also considering a $40,000 a year allotment to an environmental initiative that could be solar panels. We're in discussions of that. But so they are considering, they're open to some parts of our proposal. So they are listening, which is exciting.
Yeah. And here in Florida, we are very vulnerable to the rising seas because our coast, we are a lot of coastline.
Exactly.
In this state.
Yeah. So, parts of Miami are flooding that have never flooded before.
No, and it's the truth. I mean, when I was a kid and would go to Hollywood beaches, there was actual beach. And a few years ago, I stayed at a hotel on the beach in Hollywood, and there is no beach. The ocean comes right up to the seawall at high and low tide.
Oh, my gosh.
So, I mean, it's you can see it with your own eyes if you don't want to believe it for some political reason. And I mean, you probably remember back in the day, Curtis, when Lake Erie, you could set it on fire.
Yeah.
It was so polluted.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I wonder how, as a kid, I would wonder, well, if you use water to put out a fire, what do you put out a fire that's in water? I mean, have we invented something to put that out? But,
we're speaking with Scott Novak, about fossil fuel divestment at Rollins, and you touched on some really interesting points. One thing that I maybe you have the answer for this. You mentioned that there are, is it 41 schools that are already
41 schools
divesting from the fossil. Do you know if there's a concentration of those schools in northern parts of the United States as opposed to south of the red and blue states, or these kind of things?
I'd have to look at a map for that. I do know, based on from what I've heard, most of them seem to be up north. I know that no college in Florida has committed to fossil fuel divestment yet. So like I said, Rollins would be the first. Yeah. If in Rollins hasn't committed to fossil fuel divestment per se, they've just committed to a more environmentally sustainable fund for a portion of its endowment.
But you make an intriguing argument that I think the financial board of trustees should take heed to about how these different funds that aren't fossil fuel type are doing so much better. And, and like that, anyone should listen to that. You know what I mean? That's, and it's like you said, it's only going to get worse as global warming and these, natural things start, occurring that,
exactly.
I just think it's interesting that.
And it boggles my mind in a state nicknamed the Sunshine State. Why we are not more invested in solar. It's a free.
It's right around the corner. Trust me. I mean, they've been saying that for years, but I really believe it now.
Yes, that just goes to show the power of these fossil fuel companies, that it's not because we don't have the solutions. We have the solutions, which is really exciting. Right. We have the technology. It's political will at this point. And it's because of fossil fuel companies lobbying millions of dollars to our politicians that we still have people denying climate change.
And we subsidize these companies with our tax dollars, which is amazing.
Globally, the subsidization of fossil fuel companies is much more than the subsidization of clean energy, which is pretty staggering when you think about that.
Yeah.
The one that worries me is fracking.
Fracking is
just because of our water just underneath the surface in the aquifer, and we're already running out of water in the state of Florida.
Yeah.
I know my buddy Dick Batchelor is on several committees that are looking at.
Yeah, that's a real problem here for the Orlando area. For sure.
There's a lot of room for change, no doubt. And Scott Novak, you're championing this change. I think this is great. What are you going to go into? What field?
I would like to go into anything, as long as I'm involved in politics, I feel that I'll be fulfilled. So I'm a senior at Rollins right now. I'll be graduating. Don't know quite where I'm going yet, but I think political activism is so important. And just for anyone who's out there, I know our political process is quite difficult, but don't be cynical about it. I think if you're cynical, then the interests that are not in the public interest win. So you have to be optimistic and keep fighting for change. So
yeah, I saw somebody put it really well the other day that even when you don't vote, you vote because you're giving somebody else twice the vote.
Absolutely. So there's lots of ways to be involved here in Orlando. If you want to get involved with the Rollins Coalition of Sustainable Investment, you can go to www.divestrollins.com. We have a petition there you can sign. Anyone in the community can sign it, not just Rollins students, although we have close to 500 students now who have signed. So
it's got legs.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's got a voice. That's awesome. Enacting change, being relevant. Thank you so much, Scott Novak. We really appreciate it. He is here from the Rollins Honors Program. We have been doing a series of lectures over the last 3 weeks. I believe we have one more next week. We really appreciate you stopping in, talking about fossil fuel divestment at Rollins, and we wish you well.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.